Some horror stories are about what jumps out of the dark. Longlegs is about what has been waiting inside the dark the whole time, shaping lives long before anyone knows its name. This story does not begin with one clean murder and one smart detective following clues in a straight line. It begins with a child, a strange face in the snow, and a feeling that evil has already crossed the threshold before the door was ever opened. By the time the case fully reveals itself, the real terror is not just the killer. It is the possibility that he has been standing closer to the truth than anyone wants to believe. The movie opens in the past, in rural Oregon during the mid-1970s. A young girl named Lee Harker is outside in the cold with a camera when something deeply wrong enters the frame of her life. A pale, awkward man in heavy makeup and a voice that feels both childish and inhuman appears near her home. He does not attack her in the usual way horror villains do. Instead, the scene plays like a crack opening in reality itself. It is brief, unsettling, and impossible to forget. Then the story jumps forward 20 years, and that strange encounter becomes the first shadow behind everything else. In the 1990s, Lee is now an FBI agent with a quiet, eerie instinct that seems to operate beyond normal procedure. She is not loud or flashy. She does not feel like the typical movie investigator who dominates every room. Instead, she moves with restraint as if she is always listening to something no one else can hear. Early on, that instinct helps her identify danger in a way that gets the attention of her superiors, especially Agent William Carter, who soon brings her into a much larger case. That case involves a string of murder-suicides spread across Oregon. In every one, the pattern is the same. A father murders his family, then kills himself, and somewhere near the scene there is a coded letter signed with the name Longlegs. The terrifying part is that there is no obvious physical evidence placing an outside killer at the crime scenes. The fathers appear to have acted alone, yet the letters suggest a guiding hand behind the bloodshed. That contradiction is what makes the case feel impossible. Either the pattern is a coincidence too precise to be real, or someone has found a way to shape these murders without leaving a clear trace. Lee begins studying the letters and the family histories. As she works, the case stops looking random and starts taking on the shape of ritual. Every affected family had a 9-year-old daughter. The dates circle around birthdays. The spacing between the murders suggests design rather than impulse. And the more Lee looks, the more the crimes feel less like ordinary serial killings and more like steps inside a larger occult arrangement. She's not just trying to identify a murderer anymore. She is trying to understand a system of evil that may have been operating for years under the surface of ordinary American homes. At the same time, the movie carefully keeps Lee's personal life close to the investigation. Her relationship with her mother, Ruth Harker, is distant, tense, and filled with unspoken discomfort. Ruth is religious, guarded, and emotionally hard to read. Their phone conversations feel strained in a way that suggests history neither of them wants to name. The case is making Lee feel increasingly unstable, but home does not offer comfort. If anything, it makes the air around her feel even stranger. As Lee moves deeper into the murders, the investigation reveals another disturbing clue. The families all seem connected to doll-like figures, each containing a mysterious metal sphere hidden inside the head. These dolls do not just look creepy in the obvious horror movie way. They feel ceremonial, as if they were built to carry influence rather than simply resemble children. The idea becomes even more unsettling when Lee and Carter connect one past case to a survivor named Carrie Ann Camera, a woman now in a psychiatric hospital. She is the only person known to have lived through one of Longlegs' connected family slaughters, and speaking to her only pushes the case further from logic. Carrie Ann is fractured, frightened, and unstable, but she confirms that something happened in her house that cannot be explained through ordinary violence alone. More importantly, she points the investigation toward the idea that Longlegs does not always enter a home directly. Sometimes he comes through symbols, objects, preparations, and whatever influence sits behind the dolls. Lee listens, but what makes the scene so effective is that she is not only hearing another witness. She is slowly hearing the shape of her own past beginning to answer back. The coded letters keep leading her forward, but the case starts closing around her personally when she receives a birthday card from Longlegs himself. That changes the emotional scale immediately. Up to that point, the murders were horrifying but still outward, something she was assigned to solve. Now the killer is speaking directly to her, which means she is not outside the pattern. She has been inside it in some way for much longer than she realized. The card also carries a threat connected to her mother, which forces Lee to confront the possibility that the investigation and her childhood were never separate stories at all. Following that trail, Lee uncovers an old police report involving her own home from the day before her 9th birthday. Ruth had once reported an intruder. That discovery sends Lee back into her childhood belongings, where she finds a Polaroid photograph that confirms the worst possibility. The bizarre man from the opening scene was real. He did come to the house. He did stand near her when she was a child, and that means Longlegs has been woven into her life from the beginning. Using the photograph, the Bureau is finally able to identify and arrest him. He is not some invisible supernatural force. He is a real man named Dale Ferdinand Cobble, better known as Longlegs, but the arrest does not bring relief. If anything, it makes the terror sharper because once Lee sees him in custody, she realizes he's both ridiculous and horrifying at the same time. He is twitchy, theatrical, grotesque, and yet committed to whatever dark thing he serves. His presence works because it never lets Longlegs become a smooth, genius mastermind. He feels diseased, broken open, and somehow inhuman in spirit even while trapped inside a body. During interrogation, Longlegs gives no simple confession. Instead, he talks around the truth in satanic imagery and cruel hints, speaking of evil not as metaphor but as a living force he serves. He also makes one critical implication. He suggests Ruth is involved. Before Lee or the Bureau can pull more out of him, he kills himself by smashing his face repeatedly into the table. It is a shocking scene, but more than that. It feels like the final act of someone who knows he has already planted everything needed for the horror to continue. After his death, the case should have ended. It does not. The pattern is still incomplete, and Lee begins to understand that Longlegs could not have done everything alone. The final missing date in the occult sequence points to a murder that has not happened yet, and the timing lines up with the birthday of Agent Carter's daughter, Ruby. The dread shifts from investigation to countdown. Lee's no longer trying to solve an old pattern. She's trying to stop its last movement before it locks into place. What follows is the revelation that reframes the entire film. Ruth Harker has been Longlegs' accomplice for years. The movie reveals this slowly and cruelly. When Longlegs came to Lee's childhood home, Ruth begged for her daughter's life. In return for sparing Lee, Longlegs demanded Ruth's loyalty. She agreed, and from then on she helped him carry out the family killings. Longlegs would create the dolls, each holding a metal sphere and whatever evil force was tied to it. Ruth, disguised as a harmless religious visitor, would deliver them into homes. Once inside, the object would help bend the fathers toward familicide. The horror here is not only satanic, it is domestic. It is the idea that murder entered through trust, through the image of care, through a mother figure welcomed through the door. Even worse, Lee had her own doll, which was used to suppress her memory of Longlegs and distort her understanding of the past. That explains her strange intuition, her gaps in memory, and the dreamlike feeling that has haunted the entire investigation. She was not just chosen by the case because she was gifted. She was shaped by the case from childhood, then steered back into it as an adult. Once Lee understands the truth, she rushes to stop the final murder, but Ruth is already in motion. She has brought one of the dolls to the Carter home on Ruby's birthday, and the family has already fallen under its influence. When Lee arrives, the atmosphere is no longer that of an investigation. It is a nightmare already unfolding. Agent Carter has murdered his wife. The doll is still exerting its hold. Ruby is present, passive, and eerily disconnected, and Ruth is ready to finish the ritual by killing the child. Lee is forced into the last series of choices with almost no time to think. She shoots Carter to stop him. She shoots Ruth to stop her from stabbing Ruby. In a matter of seconds, she destroys both the father figure who trusted her and the mother who betrayed her. It is a brutal ending because the case does not close with victory in any normal sense. Lee solves it, but only by killing the two people standing at the center of her remaining personal world. And even then, the terror refuses to end cleanly. Lee tries to destroy the doll, but her gun misfires. Ruby remains in a trance-like state, staring at the object that still seems to hold power over the room. The movie ends not on relief but on the unbearable possibility that evil has not been removed, only interrupted. Longlegs may be dead, Ruth may be dead, but the force behind them has not been explained or defeated. That is what makes Longlegs so disturbing. On the surface, it is an FBI procedural about coded messages, dead families, and a serial killer with occult habits. Underneath, it is a story about corruption entering the home through symbols of love, religion, and family. The devil here is not just a distant presence in ritual language. It is a pressure that bends parents against children, mothers against daughters, and memory against truth. Lee Harker is also what makes the film work. She is not written as a superhuman detective who cleanly overpowers every clue. She is vulnerable, confused, and haunted long before she understands why. Her arc is not about mastering the case so much as surviving the realization that the case has always been inside her life. By the end, she is not standing triumphant over evil. She is standing in the wreckage of what that evil did to her family and to the families of others, trying to stop one final child from being swallowed the same way she almost was. Longlegs himself is terrifying not because he is physically unstoppable, but because he feels like a servant of something older and uglier than his own body. He is theatrical, pathetic, grotesque, and somehow still deeply menacing. The film never lets him become a charming mastermind. He is closer to a wound in human form, crawling through the edges of American suburbia and pretending to be harmless just long enough to place horror where it will grow. By the end, Longlegs becomes more than a serial killer story. It becomes a nightmare about inheritance, memory, faith, and the evil that can hide behind the ordinary face of home. And when the final image leaves Lee staring at a child who may or may not still be trapped under the influence of that doll, the movie lands on its bleakest truth. Some horrors do not end when the killer dies. They end only if the spell is broken, and in this story, that break may never fully come.